The Wrecking Crew is a 2026 American buddy cop action comedy film, and when we say American, we mean this is a full-scale Hollywood production backed by Amazon MGM Studios, one of the most powerful entertainment studios operating in the industry today. The film was directed by Angel Manuel Soto and written by Jonathan Tropper. Principal photography for the film began in October 2024, and the production took place primarily in Hawaii and New Zealand, two locations that bring a very unique visual and cultural energy to the overall experience of the movie. The director, Angel Manuel Soto, is someone who already made his mark in Hollywood by directing Blue Beetle for DC, and with The Wrecking Crew, he transitions into a much more mature, R-rated action comedy space that pushes the limits of both humor and on-screen violence. He handles the balance between laughs and brutal action with a confident hand, keeping the film entertaining from the first scene to the last. The screenplay was crafted by Jonathan Tropper, a writer who has always been drawn to complicated family stories, and that sensibility runs deeply through the core of this film. Underneath all the explosions, car chases, and fistfights, this is ultimately a movie about two brothers figuring out who they are to each other after years of silence and resentment. The film stars two of the biggest and most physically imposing stars in Hollywood right now, Jason Momoa and Dave Bautista, and their pairing was the talk of the internet long before the movie even released. The combination of Momoa's wild, loose energy and Bautista's disciplined, measured presence creates a dynamic that is genuinely entertaining to watch unfold. The movie was produced and released exclusively on Amazon Prime Video, making it a streaming-first blockbuster, and it performed exceptionally well right out of the gate upon its release. Plot details. Now let us get deep into the story, because The Wrecking Crew has a lot going on beneath its action-packed surface. The film centers on two men who are half-brothers and who have been completely estranged from each other for years. Their names are Johnny and James Hale. These two men share the same father but grew up in completely different worlds, lived completely different lives, and have developed completely different personalities, which makes their eventual reunion all the more chaotic and entertaining. The story kicks off with the death of their father, Walter Hale, a private investigator based in Hawaii. Walter is killed in what initially appears to be a hit-and-run accident on the streets of Hawaii, but as the story progresses, it becomes very clear that his death was no accident. It was a calculated murder carried out by powerful and dangerous people. Before his death, Walter had been conducting a secret investigation and had managed to uncover a massive conspiracy involving corruption at the highest levels of local government. When the news of their father's death reaches both brothers, they are forced to come together for the first time in years. Johnny, played by Jason Momoa, is a suspended police detective. He is loud, impulsive, reckless, and has absolutely no patience for rules or procedure. He lives in Oklahoma, and has been keeping his distance from both his father and his half-brother for a long time. James, played by Dave Bautista, is a disciplined and focused United States Navy SEAL. He is structured, calm under pressure, and believes in following a plan rather than running headfirst into danger. He is the one who is already living in Hawaii with his wife Layla and their children, and he has been trying to build a stable, peaceful life for his family. When Yakuza thugs show up at Johnny's home in Oklahoma, looking for a package they believe Walter had sent him, Johnny realizes that his father's death is far more dangerous and complicated than a simple accident. This attack forces him to take the situation seriously, and despite his complicated feelings about Walter due to years of estrangement, he travels to Hawaii to attend the funeral and dig into what really happened. Once in Hawaii, Johnny reconnects with James, and the two men immediately fall into the kind of tension and bickering that only brothers who have not seen each other in years can produce. They also reconnect with their cousin Nanny, who works for the governor of Hawaii, Peter Mayhew, a man who has been a long-time family friend. As the brothers begin investigating, they start peeling back the layers of a deeply disturbing conspiracy. They discover that a powerful and ruthless criminal named Robichaud has been working alongside the Yakuza to bribe Governor Peter Mayhew. The goal of this bribery scheme is to legalize gambling in Hawaii and to obtain permission to build a massive casino on Hawaiian homeland, which is sacred and protected territory. Walter Hale had managed to uncover this entire plot, and had secured the evidence in the form of a flash drive. Before he was killed, he attempted to send this flash drive to Johnny, which is exactly why the Yakuza came to Oklahoma looking for it.as. James and Johnny close in on the truth. Robichaud makes his move and kidnaps both Layla, James's wife, and Nanny, their cousin. He demands the flash drive in exchange for their lives. Rather than negotiating or waiting for backup, the brothers do what they do best and launch a full-scale assault on Robichaud's compound. They fight their way through waves of Yakuza enforcers and ultimately rescue Layla and Nanny. Nakamura, the Yakuza leader, and Robichaud are both killed in the confrontation. Governor Mayho is subsequently arrested for his role in the corruption scandal. In a surprising final moment, the leader of a criminal syndicate actually provides Johnny with the name of the man who killed his mother years ago, something Johnny has been carrying as a deep personal wound for his entire life. However, in a genuinely emotional and unexpected moment, Johnny takes the piece of paper with the name written on it and burns it in a barbecue. It is a quiet but powerful decision that suggests Johnny is choosing to let go of his past rather than chase more violence. By the end of the film, Johnny decides to stay in Hawaii with James, and the two brothers begin to plan how they will use the millions of dollars Walter left behind in a digital wallet. It is a warm and satisfying ending that leaves the door wide open for future adventures. The casting of this film is one of its strongest assets, and every major role is filled with an actor who brings real presence and skill to the project. Jason Momoa plays Johnny Hale, the suspended police detective and the wilder of the two brothers. Momoa brings the exact kind of charismatic unpredictability that the role demands. He is funny, magnetic, and physically commanding, and his portrayal of a man who is reckless on the outside but deeply wounded on the inside gives the character surprising emotional depth. Dave Bautista plays James Hale, the Navy SEAL and the more grounded and disciplined brother. Bautista has spent years proving that he is far more than just a physically impressive presence on screen, and here he delivers a performance that is grounded, funny in a very dry way, and genuinely moving in the film's more emotional moments. His chemistry with Momoa is the engine that keeps the entire movie running. Claes Bang plays the villain Robichaud, the criminal mastermind behind the conspiracy. Bang is a Danish actor of considerable talent, and he brings a cold, calculating menace to the role that makes Robichaud a genuinely threatening antagonist. Temuera Morrison, the New Zealand actor best known to audiences as Boba Fett, plays a role in the film that connects to the family's Hawaiian roots and adds cultural authenticity to the story. Jacob Batalon, widely recognized as Ned from the Spider-Man films, plays a character named Pika. It is worth mentioning that Batalon was actually born and raised in Hawaii, which made his casting feel especially meaningful. He has spoken about how overjoyed he was to film in his home state. Frankie Adams, also a New Zealand actress known from The Expanse, appears in a supporting role and adds real energy to the ensemble. Miyavi, the Japanese musician and actor, plays Nakamura, the Yakuza leader, and brings a sharp and intimidating screen presence to the role. Stephen Root and Morena Baccarin round out the supporting cast, both bringing seasoned professionalism and strong performances to their respective roles. Release date and platform: The Wrecking Crew was officially released on January 28, 2026, exclusively on Amazon Prime Video. It is an Amazon original film, which means it is available only through a Prime Video subscription and is not available for rent or purchase on any other platform. The film is available in HDR and UHD quality on supported devices, offering the best possible visual experience for home viewers. The runtime of the film is 2 hours and 4 minutes, giving it a proper blockbuster runtime that never feels padded or overstayed. In terms of its performance after release, the numbers were genuinely remarkable. Within just 24 hours of dropping on the platform, The Wrecking Crew topped Prime Video charts across 40 countries. The Wrecking Crew, 2026, the complete story. The death that started it all. The story of The Wrecking Crew begins not with action or comedy, but with a death. A quiet, devastating death that sets everything else in motion. Walter Hale, a private investigator living and working in Honolulu, Hawaii, is struck and killed on the streets in what initially appears to the local police to be a straightforward hit-and-run accident. A man is dead. A car did not stop. Case seemingly simple on the surface. But as with everything in this story, the truth beneath the surface is far darker, far more dangerous, and far more complicated than anyone initially realizes. Walter Hale was not killed by chance. He was killed because he knew too much. He had uncovered a conspiracy that powerful and ruthless men needed to stay buried, and his death was their way of making sure it stayed that way. The problem for those powerful men, however, is that Walter had already taken steps to make sure his discovery would not die with him. Walter Hale was a complicated man in life. He was a father, but not the kind of father that either of his sons would describe with warmth or fondness. He had 2 sons from 2 different women, and both of those sons had grown up carrying the weight of a father who was not fully present in their lives. Those 2 sons are James and Johnny Hale, and they are the heart of this entire story. They are half-brothers, meaning they share a father but had completely different mothers and grew up in completely separate worlds. By the time the movie begins, they have not spoken to each other in years. The estrangement between them is deep and rooted in old pain, old grudges, and the kind of complicated feelings that only broken families can produce. They are 2 men who have built separate lives and have chosen, consciously or not, to keep their distance from both each other and from the man who connected them. When Walter is killed, both brothers are informed of his passing separately. For James, this news lands with a particular kind of heaviness, because despite everything, he had maintained some connection to Hawaii and to the broader family. For Johnny, the news is more complicated. Johnny had moved away from Hawaii entirely, settling in Oklahoma, partly to escape the dangerous criminal world that had always hovered at the edges of his life there. His feelings about his father are a mixture of grief, resentment, and the strange guilt that comes from mourning someone you had chosen to keep at arm's length. He is initially ambivalent, uncertain whether he even wants to engage with this loss at all, given how little of a relationship he and Walter had maintained. The attack in Oklahoma. That ambivalence is shattered very quickly. Before Johnny has even had the time to fully process the news of his father's death, his home in Oklahoma is violently invaded by Yakuza thugs. These men are not there to offer condolences. They are there because they believe Walter sent a package to Johnny before his death, and they want that package recovered before anyone can use its contents against them. The attack is sudden, brutal, and terrifying, and it makes something very clear to Johnny in a way that no amount of grief or reflection ever could. His father's death was not an accident. Walter was murdered, and the people who killed him are now coming after anyone connected to what he knew. Johnny is not a man who backs down from a fight. He is a suspended police detective, someone who has spent his career operating right on the edge of what is legal and acceptable, a man who runs headfirst into danger where others would hesitate. He handles the attack, survives the encounter, and makes a decision. He is going to Hawaii. Not just to attend his father's funeral and pay whatever complicated respects he can manage, but to dig into what really happened and to find out what Walter had uncovered that was worth killing him over. The Oklahoma attack transforms what might have been a reluctant trip to a funeral into a full-blown investigation, and Johnny is not the kind of man to do anything halfway. Hawaii and the reunion. Johnny arrives in Hawaii and immediately finds himself in the thick of a family reunion he was not entirely prepared for emotionally. He reconnects with his half-brother James, and the tension between them is immediate and palpable. These are 2 men who could not be more different in personality and approach. James, the Navy SEAL, is structured, disciplined, calm, and methodical. He plans before he acts. He measures his words. He has built a stable, loving life in Hawaii with his wife Layla and their children, and he is deeply protective of that stability. He has worked hard to create a sense of peace in his life, and Johnny's arrival threatens to disrupt every bit of it. Johnny, by contrast, is loud, impulsive, physically dominant, and completely unbothered by rules or procedure. He trusts his instincts over any plan. He would rather charge through a wall than look for the door. He is raw and emotional in a way that James keeps everything buttoned tight. The friction between these two personalities is both the comedic engine and the emotional core of the entire film. They clash constantly, argue about everything, and cannot agree on a single approach to anything. Yet underneath all of that friction is the undeniable fact that they are brothers, connected by blood and by the same wound of growing up with a father who was not really there. Also arriving for the funeral is their cousin Nanny, a woman who occupies an interesting position in Hawaiian society. Nanny works for the governor of Hawaii, a man named Peter Mayhew, who has been a long-time family friend of the Hales. Mayhew presents himself as a pillar of the community, a leader who cares deeply about Hawaii and its people. His connection to the family is presented as warm and genuine, at least on the surface. He attends the funeral and offers his condolences with the practiced ease of a man who has always known how to present himself well in public settings. The investigation begins. After the funeral, both brothers begin to investigate their father's death separately, each approaching it in his own way. James is systematic and careful, while Johnny is instinctive and aggressive. Eventually their separate investigations lead them to the same place, Walter's apartment in Honolulu, which they find has been ransacked. Someone got there before them and tore the place apart looking for something. Whatever Walter had, whatever he had discovered and documented, it was important enough for dangerous people to rip through every inch of his home trying to find it. This discovery forces James and Johnny to actually begin working together, even though their methods continue to clash at nearly every step. As they dig deeper, they start piecing together the shape of what Walter had uncovered. They discover that before his death, Walter had been conducting a secret investigation into a powerful and dangerous criminal named Marcus Robichaux. Robichaux is a developer, a businessman of considerable wealth and influence, but his legitimate business dealings are just the cover for something far more sinister. He has been working in close partnership with a Yakuza organization operating in Hawaii, and together they have constructed a deeply corrupt scheme that reaches all the way to the top of Hawaiian state government. The scheme is both simple in its purpose and devastating in its implications. Robichaux wants to build a massive casino on Hawaiian homeland, which is land that is legally designated and protected specifically for native Hawaiian homesteaders. It is sacred, culturally significant territory that carries enormous political and legal protections. Getting permission to build on such land is essentially impossible through legitimate channels. So Robichaux and his Yakuza partners chose a different approach. They began bribing Governor Peter Mayhew, using a combination of money and leverage to get the governor to bend the rules, abuse his authority, and ultimately grant Robichaux the permissions he needed. If successful, the scheme would have made Robichaux extraordinarily wealthy while essentially allowing him to exploit and destroy land that holds deep meaning for the Hawaiian people. Walter Hale had somehow uncovered this entire scheme in the course of his private investigation work. He had gathered the evidence needed to expose it, compiling everything onto a flash drive. And before the people behind the conspiracy could silence him, he managed to send that flash drive to Johnny in Oklahoma. That is why the Yakuza came to Johnny's home. They knew Walter had sent something before his death, and they correctly assumed it went to one of his sons. They needed to recover it before it could be used to bring everything crashing down. The conspiracy deepens. As James and Johnny continue putting the pieces together, the full weight of what they are dealing with becomes clear. This is not just a murder investigation anymore. It is a confrontation with a network of criminal power that has been quietly corrupting the institutions of Hawaii for years. Robichaux is not some small-time gangster. He is a sophisticated and ruthless operator who has made himself nearly untouchable through his connections and his money. The Yakuza organization working alongside him is equally dangerous, organized, and violent. And the governor of Hawaii, the man their cousin Nanny works for and the man their family has known and trusted for years, is complicit in all of it. The revelation about Mayho is particularly painful, because it means the brothers cannot simply take what they know to the authorities in the conventional sense. Mayho has enough political influence to potentially bury any investigation or tip off Robichaux before any action can be taken. The brothers realize they are largely on their own, which suits Johnny just fine and makes James considerably more uncomfortable. For James, who has spent his career in a world governed by chains of command, rules of engagement, and mission planning, the idea of operating outside any official structure is deeply uncomfortable. For Johnny, a suspended detective who has spent his career bending and occasionally breaking the rules when he felt it was justified, this is practically a normal Tuesday. Throughout this section of the film, the comedy between the two brothers is at its richest and most entertaining. Their arguments about how to proceed, their completely opposite instincts about every situation they walk into, and the physical contrast between two enormous men who cannot seem to agree on anything produces scene after scene of genuinely funny interaction. But the film is always careful to remind the audience that underneath the humor, there is real pain. These two men carry wounds from their shared past, from the father they both lost in different ways long before he physically died, and from the lives they built separately because the alternative felt too hard. The kidnapping and the final confrontation. The situation reaches its breaking point when Robichaux decides that negotiation is no longer an option. Having apparently realized that the brothers are closing in on the truth and are in possession of the flash drive that could destroy everything he has built, Robichaux makes a brutal and calculated move. He kidnaps two people who are precious to the brothers. He takes Layla, James's wife, and Nanny, their cousin who works for the governor. He then contacts James and Johnny directly, making his demands simple and non-negotiable. Deliver the flash drive, or the women die. For James, this is not a difficult decision in the sense that he will do anything to protect his wife. But the idea of simply handing over the evidence and allowing Robichaux to walk free is something neither brother is willing to accept. And so they make the only decision that feels right to them both, which is to go in and take back what belongs to them by force. They will not negotiate. They will not comply. They are going to assault Robichaux's compound, rescue Layla and Nanny, destroy Robichaux and his Yakuza partners, and burn the entire conspiracy to the ground. It is exactly the kind of decision that Johnny would make without hesitation, and this time, James is fully on board. What follows is the film's spectacular final act. James and Johnny launch a full assault on Robichaux's property, fighting their way through layers of heavily armed Yakuza guards in a sequence that is both intensely violent and genuinely thrilling. The two brothers, so different in their approaches throughout the film, are forced to combine their skills in a way that shows just how effective they are when they actually work together rather than against each other. James brings the tactical precision and military training of a seasoned Navy SEAL, coordinating their movements and identifying the most efficient paths through the resistance they face. Johnny brings the raw aggression, the fearlessness, and the sheer physical ferocity of a man who has never backed down from anything in his life. In the final confrontation with Robichaux himself, the villain attempts to escape by boat, which proves to be a futile effort. Johnny, having earlier spotted a World War I antique grenade on display in Robichaux's office, had taken it with him. In the climactic moment of the battle, Johnny pulls the pin on that grenade and hurls it at Robichaux, the explosion bringing the corrupt developer's reign of violence and corruption to a definitive end. However, the force of the explosion throws Johnny himself into the sea. For a moment, the situation is genuinely dangerous. But James dives in immediately, hauling his brother back out of the water, holding him, and telling him repeatedly that he has him. It is a quiet, deeply emotional beat in the middle of all the chaos, a moment where the film strips away every bit of the comedy and the action and just lets two brothers be brothers. It is the moment their reconciliation truly becomes complete, not through a conversation or an argument, but through one of them saving the other's life. Nakamura, the leader of the Yakuza operation, is also dealt with during the course of the assault. The criminal infrastructure that Robichaud built alongside the Yakuza is dismantled in the chaos of the brothers' attack. With the evidence from the flash drive now secured and the criminals responsible for their father's murder either dead or exposed, the formal arm of justice can move in. Governor Peter Mayhew is subsequently arrested and charged for his role in the corruption scheme. His years of abusing his position and betraying the people of Hawaii come to an end, and the political scandal that erupts around his arrest sends shockwaves through Hawaiian public life. The ending and what it means. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the film delivers one of its most emotionally layered moments. The leader of the syndicate, a criminal organization that has operated in Honolulu, and which had some involvement in the broader criminal landscape of the story, approaches Johnny with an unexpected gesture. As a way of expressing appreciation for the fact that Johnny and James effectively eliminated the Yakuza threat and cleaned up a situation that was bad for everyone, the syndicate leader provides Johnny with the name of the man who killed his mother years ago. This is something Johnny has carried for his entire life, a wound that has never healed, a question that has never been answered. And now suddenly, he has the answer in his hands, written on a piece of paper. What Johnny does with that information is the film's most quietly powerful moment. He does not call for revenge. He does not announce a plan to hunt the man down. He takes the piece of paper, walks over to a backyard barbecue, and burns it. He watches the paper and the name written on it turn to ash, and he lets it go. It is a moment that reframes everything we understand about Johnny as a character. This impulsive, aggressive, reckless man who has spent the entire film running toward danger and chaos makes a deliberate choice to stop running toward one particular source of pain and instead release it entirely. It is the act of a man who has realized, perhaps for the first time, that carrying old wounds into the future is a choice, and that he is allowed to make a different one. By the end of the film, Johnny decides to stay in Hawaii. He is not going back to Oklahoma. He is not going back to his suspended detective's life. He is going to stay close to his brother and the family they are slowly, messily, imperfectly rebuilding in the wake of Walter's death. The two brothers, who began the film as near strangers defined by mutual resentment and years of silence, end it as something resembling what they always should have been to each other. Not perfect, not without friction, but genuinely connected. And with the millions of dollars that Walter left behind in a digital wallet, they begin making plans for what comes next. The story ends on a note of genuine warmth and possibility. Two very large, very dangerous, very funny men standing in the Hawaiian sunlight and figuring out, for the first time, what it means to actually be family. Here is the complete life history of the actors of The Wrecking Crew, 2026, written in full detail. The actors of The Wrecking Crew, 2026, complete life histories. Jason Momoa. The story of Jason Momoa is one of the most genuinely remarkable journeys in modern Hollywood, a story that moves from a small town in Iowa all the way to the largest blockbuster franchises on the planet, driven not by luck alone but by an extraordinary combination of physical presence, raw determination, and a deep and unshakable connection to his cultural roots. His full name is Joseph Jason Namakiha Momoa, and he was born on August 1, 1979, in Honolulu, Hawaii. His father, Joseph Momoa, was a painter of native Hawaiian and Samoan descent, and his mother, Connie Lemke, was a photographer who had come from Iowa and carried German, Irish, and Native American ancestry in her background. On paper, the combination of those two people sounds like the beginning of a remarkable story, And in many ways it was, but the reality of Jason's early childhood was shaped more by absence than by unity. His parents separated when he was just a few months old, and his mother made the decision to return to her home state of Iowa, taking the infant Jason with her. Jason grew up in Norwalk, Iowa, a small, quiet Midwestern town that could not have been more different from the tropical Hawaiian Islands where he had been born. He was raised almost entirely by his mother, and by all accounts his childhood in Iowa was humble and grounded. He was the only child of his parents together, and growing up in a predominantly white Midwestern community while carrying the physical features and cultural heritage of a Hawaiian and Samoan father made him stand out from a very early age. He attended Norwalk High School, where he was a physically active and adventurous young man, developing a love for outdoor activities that would stay with him for the rest of his life. In his early teenage years, his mother took him to Custer State Park in South Dakota, and it was there that he first discovered rock climbing and bouldering, two activities that he pursued with deep passion and which contributed enormously to the extraordinary physical conditioning that would eventually define his public image. After finishing high school, Momoa made a decision that would change everything. Rather than staying in Iowa, he returned to Hawaii, the place of his birth, driven by a desire to reconnect with the Hawaiian side of his identity and heritage. He enrolled at the University of Hawaii with an initial interest in marine biology, a subject that spoke to his deep connection with the ocean and the natural world. However, the academic path was not ultimately the one that life had in store for him. While working in a surf shop in Honolulu at the age of 19, folding shirts and doing the kind of ordinary work that young men without a clear direction often do, something completely unexpected happened. He was discovered by a renowned international fashion designer named Takeo Kobayashi, who immediately recognized in the young man an extraordinary physical presence and encouraged him to pursue a career in modeling. What followed happened with remarkable speed. Momoa entered the modeling world and almost immediately won the title of Hawaii's Model of the Year in 1999. He walked in prestigious fashion shows, hosted the Miss Teen Hawaii USA pageant, and walked the runway for Louis Vuitton Hawaii, experiences that gave him his first real taste of being in front of an audience and performing under the pressure of public attention. But modeling, for all its glamour, was never where his deepest ambitions lay. Acting was calling him, and the opportunity came in the same year that his modeling career was taking off. In 1999, the television show Baywatch was in its 10th season and had rebranded itself as Baywatch Hawaii, filming on location in Honolulu. The production held auditions for new cast members, and Momoa showed up and tried out against more than 1,000 other candidates. He was 19 years old, had no formal acting training, and had essentially no experience in front of a camera in any dramatic context. And yet he got the role, beating out every single one of those thousands of hopefuls to land the part of Jason Ione, a lifeguard on the show. He would later reflect on this moment with a mixture of pride and honesty, openly admitting that at the time of his casting he genuinely did not know how to act, but acknowledging that the experience of being on set every day taught him more about the craft than anything else could have. Baywatch Hawaii ran for 2 seasons and ended in 2001. When it finished, Momoa found himself at a crossroads that many young actors encounter after their first significant role. He had name recognition from the show but struggled to convert that into meaningful follow-up work. Rather than immediately plunging back into Hollywood's machinery, he spent a period traveling the world, exploring different cultures and expanding his understanding of life beyond the small bubble of Hollywood and Hawaiian beaches. One of the most transformative stops on his travels was Tibet, where he was introduced to Buddhism, a philosophical tradition that resonated deeply with him and that he continued to study and practice for many years afterward. He eventually relocated to Los Angeles in 2001 to pursue his acting career in earnest, and the years that followed were characterized by steady but unremarkable progress. He appeared in television movies, took guest roles where he could find them, and continued to build his experience one project at a time. In 2004, he landed a regular role on the drama series North Shore, a show set in Hawaii that ran for 20 episodes before being cancelled. While North Shore was not a major breakthrough, it kept him working and kept him developing as an actor. And then, in 2004, he was cast as Ronan Dex in the science fiction series Stargate Atlantis, and everything began to change. Stargate Atlantis ran from 2005 to 2009, and for Momoa it was a transformative experience in almost every respect. Playing Ronan Dex, a warrior character defined by physical power and a brooding intensity, allowed him to develop the kind of physically demanding, dramatically intense performance style that would eventually make him famous on a global scale. He has spoken about the show as being his real film school, the place where he learned discipline, consistency, and the mechanics of long-form storytelling through the sheer volume of work required by a network television production. He also learned martial arts during this period to better serve the demands of the role, adding practical combat training to his already impressive physical toolkit. By the time Stargate Atlantis ended in 2009, Momoa was a well-known figure in genre television circles but had not yet crossed over into mainstream film stardom. That crossing began with his casting as Conan the Barbarian in the 2011 remake of the classic fantasy action film. While the film itself received a mixed reception, Momoa's physical performance in the title role announced to the broader film industry that he was capable of carrying a major studio film on his shoulders. The audition story for that role has become something of a legend in Hollywood circles. Momoa performed a haka, the traditional war dance of the Maori people of New Zealand, for the producers in order to demonstrate the kind of primal, warrior energy he intended to bring to the character. The performance was so powerful and so unexpected that it immediately convinced the room he was the right choice. But Conan was a warm-up for the role that would genuinely change his life. In 2011, HBO premiered Game of Thrones, a fantasy epic that would go on to become one of the most watched television series in history, and Jason Momoa was in it from the very first episode as Khal Drogo, the warlord leader of the Dothraki people. Despite having very limited dialogue, as much of Khal Drogo's communication in the early episodes is delivered in a fictional language rather than English, Momoa's commanding physical presence and emotionally intense performance made the character one of the most iconic in the entire series. Audiences worldwide were captivated by the power and complexity he brought to Drogo, and when the character met his end after the first season, the reaction from viewers was one of genuine mourning for a character who had communicated so much with so little conventional dialogue. Game of Thrones elevated Momoa to a level of international fame that opened doors which had previously been closed to him. He followed it with a series of film and television projects that allowed him to explore different aspects of his talent. He directed and co-wrote his first feature film, Road to Paloma, in 2014, a drama thriller that demonstrated his ambitions as a filmmaker and storyteller rather than just a performer in front of the camera. He took on increasingly varied roles across different genres and formats, always looking for characters that challenged him rather than simply repeating what he had already done. Then came the role that defined him for an entire generation of moviegoers. In 2014, he was cast as Arthur Curry, known to the world as Aquaman, in the DC Extended Universe. He made his first appearance in Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice in 2016 in a brief cameo, then appeared in the ensemble superhero film Justice League in 2017, before leading his own solo film, Aquaman, in 2018. That film was a massive global success, earning more than $1 billion at the worldwide box office and making Jason Momoa one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. His portrayal of Aquaman broke completely from the character's somewhat mocked reputation in popular culture and reframed him as a cool, irreverent, deeply likable hero whose connection to the ocean gave the film a visual and emotional identity all its own. The sequel, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, followed in 2023. Beyond the DC universe, Momoa continued to demonstrate his range across a remarkable variety of projects. He played Duncan Idaho in Denis Villeneuve's critically acclaimed adaptation of Dune in 2021, bringing a magnetic intensity to a character who occupies a deeply important place in one of science fiction's most beloved stories. He starred in the post-apocalyptic Apple TV series C for 3 seasons, playing a warrior leader in a world where human beings had lost the ability to see. He joined the Fast and Furious franchise as the villain Dante Reyes in Fast X in 2023, bringing a wildly unpredictable and genuinely threatening energy to one of cinema's most beloved action series. And in 2025, he starred alongside Jack Black in a Minecraft movie, showing yet again his ability to move between wildly different tonal registers with ease. On a personal level, Momoa's life has been as eventful as his career. He began a relationship with actress Lisa Bonet in 2005, and the couple had 2 children together, a daughter named Lola Iolani born in 2007 and a son named Nakoa Wolf Manakawapo Namakiha Momoa born in 2008. They were legally married in 2017, but announced their separation in January 2022. Momoa has always been extremely open about the depth of his cultural identity, carrying his Hawaiian and Samoan heritage with visible pride through his tattoos, his public statements, and his professional choices. He has been a passionate environmental activist for many years, founding a company called Mananala that packages water in aluminum cans rather than plastic, contributing profits to ocean cleanup efforts. He practices Brazilian jiu-jitsu, collects vintage motorcycles, surfs, rock climbs, and lives a lifestyle that reflects an authentic relationship with the natural world. With the Wrecking Crew in 2026, he returned to the Hawaiian Islands that shaped him, playing a character whose chaotic, impulsive energy reflects something genuinely personal. Dave Bautista. The life story of Dave Bautista is one of the most genuinely extraordinary stories of personal transformation and reinvention in the history of American entertainment. It is a story that begins in poverty and violence, passes through bodybuilding and professional wrestling, and arrives at a point where Bautista stands as one of the most respected and critically acclaimed actors of his generation, a man who has spent the last decade systematically proving that everyone who doubted his ability to make it as a serious actor was completely wrong. His full name is David Michael Bautista Jr., and he was born on January 18, 1969, in Washington, D.C., the son of Donna Ray Mullins and David Michael Bautista, a hairdresser. His mother is of Greek descent, and his father was born to Filipino immigrants, meaning Bautista carries a multicultural heritage that spans Southern Europe and Southeast Asia. His paternal grandfather had served in the Philippine military and held various jobs including working as a taxi driver and a barber to support the family, and that story of working-class struggle and quiet dignity runs through the Bautista family history in a way that would shape David's own understanding of what it means to earn your place in the world. The neighborhood in Washington, D.C., where Bautista grew up was not a safe or forgiving environment. It was a rough, poverty-stricken area where violence was a constant presence, and the options available to young men without resources were severely limited. Bautista has been remarkably honest and open about the difficulties of his childhood, never glossing over the reality of what growing up in that environment was like. By the time he was 9 years old, he had witnessed 3 murders take place on the front lawn of his home, a detail that speaks to the extraordinary level of violence that surrounded him throughout his earliest years. His parents separated while he was still young, and his mother raised him and his siblings largely on her own, a task that was made even more difficult by the economic pressures of their circumstances. As a teenager, Bautista went down a path that could very easily have ended his life or his freedom entirely. He began stealing cars at the age of 13, drawn into criminal activity by the environment he was surrounded by and the absence of better options or stronger guidance. He has never made excuses for this period of his life but has spoken about it with a clear-eyed honesty that reflects his broader approach to his own story. At 17, He had a serious falling out with his parents and left home entirely, beginning the experience of surviving entirely on his own at an age when most young men are still in school and living with their families. He worked as a bouncer in clubs for a period, using his size and physical presence as his primary currency in the absence of any other marketable skill. That path eventually led to a brawl that landed him in legal trouble, resulting in a sentence of 1 year of probation. It was in the aftermath of that encounter with the legal system that something shifted. Bautista discovered bodybuilding, and the sport essentially saved his life. He threw himself into the discipline of building his body with the same intensity and seriousness that he would later bring to everything else he pursued, and the results were dramatic. The physical transformation he underwent through years of dedicated training gave him not just a new body but a new identity, a new sense of purpose, and a new belief in his ability to achieve things through hard work and commitment. It was not an overnight process. It took years of grinding, consistent effort to build himself into the physical specimen that the world would eventually recognize, but he did it, one day at a time, one session at a time. His next ambition was professional wrestling, and in this pursuit he was initially rejected. He attended open tryouts for World Championship Wrestling and was turned down, a setback that would have ended the pursuit for many people but which Bautista treated as motivation rather than a verdict. He found a wrestling school willing to train him and enrolled with financial help from friends, committing himself to learning the craft of professional wrestling with the same disciplined dedication he had brought to bodybuilding. The training paid off, and in the year 2000, at the age of nearly 31, which is an extraordinarily late age to begin a professional wrestling career, he successfully signed a developmental contract with the WWE, the world's largest professional wrestling promotion. He debuted on the developmental circuit under the name Leviathan and worked his way through the system before being called up to the main WWE roster. His debut on WWE's main programming came in May 2002, where he appeared on the SmackDown brand under the name Deacon Batista, initially working as an enforcer for a preacher character. From those modest beginnings, he built himself into one of the most dominant and beloved figures in the history of professional wrestling. His size and physical power were obvious from the start, but what made Batista truly special was his ability to connect with audiences emotionally, to communicate character and story through his presence and his performance in a way that very few wrestlers of his era could match. His ascent through the WWE hierarchy was steady and remarkable. He became associated with a group of elite wrestlers called Evolution, alongside Triple H, Ric Flair, and Randy Orton, a faction that represented the top tier of WWE talent at the time. His time in Evolution taught him a great deal about storytelling and character work, but it also set up one of the most memorable moments of his wrestling career. As 2004 turned into 2005, Batista began to emerge from the shadow of Triple H, the dominant figure of the group, in a slow-building storyline that culminated in him winning the 2005 Royal Rumble match, one of WWE's most prestigious annual events. He then went on to headline WrestleMania 21, one of the most commercially successful pay-per-view events in professional wrestling history, challenging and defeating Triple H for the World Heavyweight Championship in the event's main event. What followed was years of championship reigns, iconic feuds, and stadium-filling performances that cemented Batista as one of the all-time great performers in professional wrestling history. He won the World Heavyweight Championship 4 times and the WWE Championship twice. He holds the record for the longest single reign as World Heavyweight Champion in WWE history. He fought legends of the sport including The Undertaker, John Cena, Rey Mysterio, and Chris Jericho, delivering memorable performances in matches that drew some of the largest audiences in wrestling history. He was, by any reasonable measurement, one of the biggest stars in professional wrestling during the mid-2000s, a legitimate box office draw who could fill arenas on his name alone. But Bautista always had ambitions that extended beyond the wrestling ring. Even during the height of his WWE career, he was thinking about acting, about the possibility of building a second career in film once his time in wrestling was complete. He made his first significant film appearance in a 2011 action film called House of the Rising Sun, which he later described as a humbling experience that showed him how much work he still had to do as an actor. Rather than being discouraged by the difficulty of the transition, he committed himself to the craft with the same seriousness and discipline that had defined every other major chapter of his life. He took acting classes. He worked with coaches. He studied the work of actors he admired. He auditioned for roles rather than waiting for them to be offered. He was determined to be seen as a serious actor rather than as a professional wrestler doing movies on the side. The moment that changed everything came in 2014, when he was cast as Drax the Destroyer in Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. On the surface, the role might have seemed like the kind of physically demanding but emotionally uncomplicated part that gets offered to former wrestlers, a character defined by his size and his toughness. What Bautista did with Drax was something else entirely. He found the profound sadness and grief underneath the character's literal-minded exterior, the loss of his family, the weight of a man who has been stripped of the things that gave his life meaning, and he delivered a performance of genuine emotional depth that surprised critics and delighted audiences worldwide. The film was a massive hit, one of the biggest Marvel productions to date, and Bautista's Drax became one of its most beloved elements. He reprised the role in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Avengers, Infinity War, Avengers, Endgame, and finally Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in 2023, in which his character received a deeply moving send-off that many critics cited as the emotional heart of the entire film. What separated Bautista from the crowd of action heroes who populated Hollywood during this period was his willingness to seek out challenging, unconventional roles rather than simply capitalizing on his physical presence. He appeared opposite Daniel Craig in the James Bond film Spectre in 2015, playing a cold and menacing assassin. He starred alongside Ryan Gosling and Harrison Ford in the critically acclaimed science fiction film Blade Runner 2049 in 2017, playing a character whose brief but impactful appearance in the film demonstrated real dramatic skill. He worked with Zack Snyder on Army of the Dead in 2021, a zombie heist film that gave him the opportunity to carry a large ensemble production as its emotional center. He appeared in Rian Johnson's Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery in 2022, operating brilliantly in a comedic register that again surprised audiences who had only known him from action films. And he delivered what many consider to be his most powerful screen performance in M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin in 2023, a tense and emotionally devastating thriller in which he played a character of extraordinary moral complexity. Throughout all of this, Bautista remained completely open about the fact that his deepest ambition in acting was never fame or commercial success, but genuine artistic recognition. He has said repeatedly in interviews that he has no interest in being a movie star in the conventional sense, and every interest in being a serious actor in the truest sense of the word. That authenticity and that commitment have earned him the respect of filmmakers, critics, and fellow actors in a way that very few performers who began their careers in professional sports have ever achieved. His personal life has had its share of complexity. He has been married multiple times and has children, and he has spoken openly about the challenges of balancing the demands of fame with meaningful personal relationships. With The Wrecking Crew in 2026, Bautista brought all of that accumulated experience and craft to the role of James Hale, the disciplined Navy SEAL whose measured exterior conceals a man of deep feeling and genuine warmth. The performance, like all of his best work, is more nuanced and more layered than the physical demands of the role might suggest, and it serves as another reminder that Dave Bautista is one of the most genuinely interesting actors working in Hollywood today. Claes Bang. For many years, Bang worked primarily within Danish film and television, building a reputation as one of the finest actors in Scandinavian cinema through a series of carefully chosen and beautifully executed performances. He was well known in Denmark and across the Nordic film community, but outside of Scandinavia he remained largely unknown to international audiences. That changed dramatically in 2017 when he starred in Ruben Östlund's art world satire The Square, a film that won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, the most prestigious award in world cinema. Bang's performance as Christian, a museum curator whose carefully constructed liberal values are slowly dismantled by the events of the film, was universally praised and announced to the international film community that they were dealing with an actor of extraordinary intelligence and technical precision. The recognition that followed The Square opened doors across Europe and eventually in Hollywood. He appeared in the BBC and Netflix miniseries Dracula in 2020, playing the iconic vampire in a boldly reimagined adaptation produced by Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss, a role that required him to combine aristocratic menace with dark humor in equal measure, and which he executed brilliantly. He then starred opposite Cate Blanchett in the acclaimed period drama The Northman in 2022, and continued to take on roles across different languages and different film cultures with a facility that reflects his genuine linguistic and cultural range. In The Wrecking Crew, he brings his cold, calculating precision to the role of the villain Robichaud, and his performance as a man whose surface charm conceals ruthless ambition is one of the film's strongest supporting elements. Temuera Morrison. Temuera Morrison was born on December 26, 1960, in Rotorua, New Zealand, and carries a Maori heritage from the Ngati Maniapoto tribe that has been central to both his identity and his professional work throughout his career. He grew up in New Zealand and trained as a performer, developing his skills across theatre, television, and film in the New Zealand entertainment industry before breaking out onto the international stage. His breakthrough on the world stage came with his extraordinary performance as Jake Heek in the 1994 New Zealand film Once Were Warriors, a brutal and devastating portrayal of domestic violence, and its impact on a Maori family that earned him international critical acclaim and established him as a performer of genuine power and emotional depth. The film was a cultural landmark in New Zealand and opened the world's eyes to the extraordinary talent that was developing in the New Zealand film industry. Following Once Were Warriors, Morrison continued to work across New Zealand and international productions, building a varied and respected body of work. However, the role that would make him recognizable to the broadest international audience came in 2002 when he was cast as Jango Fett in Star Wars Episode II Attack of the Clones. Because Jango Fett was established as the genetic template for all of the clone troopers in the Star Wars universe, Morrison ended up playing not just one character but effectively the face of an entire army, a unique and remarkable position in film history. He returned to the Star Wars universe decades later to play the beloved bounty hunter Boba Fett, first in a memorable appearance in The Mandalorian, and then leading his own series, The Book of Boba Fett, on Disney+, a return to the franchise that thrilled fans worldwide and demonstrated his enduring screen presence. His inclusion in The Wrecking Crew adds genuine cultural depth to the film's Hawaiian setting. Jacob Batalon. Jacob Batalon was born on October 9, 1996, in Honolulu, Hawaii, and grew up in the state that would eventually serve as the primary setting for The Wrecking Crew, a fact that made his casting in the film feel particularly meaningful and personal. He is of Filipino heritage and attended Farrington High School in Honolulu before pursuing performing arts education at the American Musical and Dramatic Academy in New York City, where he developed the comedic timing and naturalistic performance style that would eventually make him one of the most recognizable young faces in Hollywood. His breakthrough came when he was cast as Ned Leeds, the best friend of Peter Parker, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Spider-Man films beginning with Spider-Man: Homecoming in 2017. His warm, genuinely funny performance as Ned, a character defined by his wholehearted enthusiasm and his unshakable loyalty to his superhero best friend, made him an immediate fan favorite and established him as one of the MCU's most beloved supporting characters. He reprised the role in Spider-Man: Far From Home and Spider-Man: No Way Home, the latter of which was one of the highest-grossing films of 2021. Beyond the Spider-Man films, Battleman has worked to expand his range and demonstrate that he is capable of more than the lovable sidekick archetype that made him famous. His casting in The Wrecking Crew as a character named Pika brought him back to his home state of Hawaii, and he has spoken publicly about how emotionally significant and joyful that experience was for him, returning to the place he grew up and working with the local crew who called those islands home. Morena Baccarin. Morena Baccarin was born on June 2, 1979, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and moved to New York City with her family when she was 10 years old, where she grew up and received her education before pursuing a career in acting. Her mother, Vera Seta, was a well-known Brazilian actress and television presenter, meaning Morena grew up in a household where performance and storytelling were a natural part of daily life. She trained at the Juilliard School in New York, one of the most prestigious and demanding performing arts conservatories in the world, receiving a classical theatrical education that gave her technical depth to match her considerable natural charisma. After graduating from Juilliard, she began working in television, taking on guest roles and recurring parts before landing her breakthrough role as Inara Sarah in Joss Whedon's science fiction series Firefly in 2002. Firefly was cancelled after only one season but developed a passionate cult following that has sustained it as one of the most beloved science fiction series of its era, and Baccarin's elegant and emotionally intelligent performance as Inara was a central part of what made the show so special. She went on to appear in the film Serenity in 2005, which continued the story of the Firefly characters, before building a consistently strong television career across subsequent years. She played the alien Anna in the V remake series, appeared as a key recurring character in the medical drama House, and delivered one of her finest television performances as Carrie Matheson's opposite number in Homeland, bringing a psychological complexity and genuine unpredictability to a character who existed in a moral gray zone throughout her time on the show. She also appeared in the Deadpool films alongside Ryan Reynolds, playing the romantic lead in a superhero franchise that operated completely outside the conventional rules of the genre. In The Wrecking Crew, her experience and professionalism bring genuine class to the supporting ensemble. Miyavi, whose full name is Takamasa Ishihara, was born on September 14, 1981, in Kanehana, Osaka, Japan, and has built one of the most genuinely unusual and fascinating careers of any performer in this film, operating at the intersection of music and acting in a way that very few artists manage to navigate successfully. He grew up in Osaka and developed a passionate interest in music from a young age, eventually becoming one of Japan's most celebrated and internationally recognized rock musicians under the stage name Miyavi. His guitar playing style, which involves slapping and tapping the strings with his fingers rather than using a conventional pick, is so distinctive and so unusual that it has earned him recognition as one of the most innovative and technically individual guitar players in the world. He built an enormous global fanbase through his music, tours, and recordings before his acting career began. His transition into film came through the extraordinary circumstances of being cast by director Angelina Jolie in the 2014 World War II drama Unbroken, in which he played Matsuhiro Watanabe, a Japanese military officer known as the Bird, one of the most feared and notorious guards in the prisoner of war camp system. It was an astonishing piece of casting and an even more astonishing performance. Miyavi brought a cold, complex, deeply disturbing menace to the role that silenced anyone who might have doubted whether a musician could operate at the level that a major studio film required. The performance earned him international recognition as an actor and opened the door to further film work. In The Wrecking Crew, he plays Nakamura, the Yakuza leader, and brings the same chilling, controlled intensity that made his performance in Unbroken so memorable. Stephen Root. Stephen Root was born on November 17, 1951, in Sarasota, Florida, and has spent more than 4 decades building one of the most quietly impressive and consistently excellent careers in American entertainment. He trained as an actor with great seriousness and built his early career in theater before transitioning into film and television. He is one of those actors who appears in seemingly everything, whose face is instantly recognizable even when his name might not be, and whose presence in any project is an immediate signal that the casting was done with care and intelligence. He is perhaps most widely recognized for his extraordinary performance as Milton Wadhams in the cult comedy film Office Space in 1999, a character who became one of the most quoted and beloved figures in the history of American comedy cinema. He has appeared in dozens of films and television series across his long career, consistently delivering performances of remarkable specificity and commitment regardless of the size of the role, and his presence in the supporting cast of The Wrecking Crew is a marker of the film's serious approach to casting. The Wrecking Crew, 2026, budget breakdown and funny on-set moments. How the movie was born. Before getting into the numbers and the laughter, it is important to understand how this film even came to exist, because the origin story of The Wrecking Crew is itself one of the most entertaining and unusual production stories in recent Hollywood history. It did not begin in a boardroom. It did not begin with a studio executive calling 2 agents and arranging a deal. It began with a tweet. A single, impulsive tweet from Dave Bautista, fired off late one night in August 2021, that read something to the effect of wanting to make a buddy cop film with Jason Momoa in the spirit of Lethal Weapon, and suggesting that director David Leitch should helm it. Bautista later admitted in press interviews that he had been posting random thoughts on the internet for years and that most of his tweets went largely unnoticed, but this one exploded. The response was so massive, so immediate, and so enthusiastic from fans all over the world that Bautista himself was taken aback by the reaction. He immediately picked up the phone and called Jason Momoa, telling him that he needed to know about the tweet because the response it was generating was too big to ignore, and he wanted to make sure Momoa was actually on board before the internet got further ahead of any actual plan. What Momoa told him in that phone call became the actual foundation of the movie. Momoa had already been quietly developing an idea for a film set in Hawaii, a story rooted in the island culture he was born into and deeply connected to. The 2 men had already established genuine real-world chemistry and friendship while working together on the Apple TV series C, where they played characters existing in a post-apocalyptic world together. Bautista had recognized something during the production of C that very few people would have immediately noticed, which was that despite how wildly different their personalities and energies were in real life, those differences did not create friction between them. They complemented each other in a way that was natural, relaxed, and genuinely funny to be around. Bautista, who describes himself as low energy and measured, and Momoa, who is by everyone's account an absolute hurricane of warmth and chaotic enthusiasm, somehow balanced each other perfectly. Bautista knew that dynamic would translate to a screen performance of real chemistry, and he was completely right. The project went through a bidding war among studios in 2021, which MGM ultimately won. The 2 stars were formally linked to their roles and confirmed by August 2023, and then the production machinery began to slowly assemble itself. Both Momoa and Bautista were not just hired actors on this project. They were producers, meaning they had genuine creative investment in the shape and direction of the film. The screenplay was written by Jonathan Tropper, a writer known for his skill with complicated family stories. Director Angel Manuel Soto came on board following his work on Blue Beetle for DC. Principal photography began on October 5, 2024, filming primarily in Hawaii and New Zealand, and the entire production wrapped in time for the film to premiere in New York City on January 15, 2026. The budget. The officially recorded production budget for The Wrecking Crew stands at $78.5 million. This places the film in what the industry would classify as the high-budget range for a streaming action comedy, sitting comfortably above mid-budget productions while falling well below the truly enormous $150 to $200 million territory of the biggest tentpole releases. For an Amazon Prime Video exclusive that was never intended to receive a wide theatrical release, $78.5 million represents a very significant investment, and reflects Amazon MGM Studios' clear intention to treat this as a proper big-screen quality production rather than a made-for-streaming project with obvious limitations in its scope and ambition. However, it is important to understand that the $78.5 million figure represents the officially logged production budget alone. Several industry outlets, including Flick and Click, which compiled estimates based on standard Hollywood action film budgeting practices, suggest that when actor salaries, marketing, promotion, and global distribution costs are factored into the total expenditure, the real number that Amazon spent bringing this film to audiences worldwide likely sits somewhere between $120 million and $160 million. That is a dramatically larger figure, and it reflects the reality that the cost of making a film and the cost of getting people to watch that film are two very different and equally enormous expenses. Breaking down where that $78.5 million production budget actually went requires understanding the specific demands of this particular film. The two lead actors, Jason Momoa and Dave Bautista, are among the most expensive actors working in Hollywood action cinema today. Industry estimates based on their individual track records and the standard pay structures for stars at their level suggest that each of them likely earned somewhere between $8 million and $12 million for the wrecking crew. That means the two lead salaries alone potentially consumed between $16 and $24 million of the total budget before a single frame had been shot. When the fees for the supporting cast are added to that, including internationally recognized names like Claes Bang, Temuera Morrison, Morena Baccarin, and Stephen Root, who each commanded fees in the range of $1 to $5 million depending on their specific deal, the total above-the-line talent cost represents a truly enormous portion of the overall budget. Beyond the talent, the action sequences themselves were a massive driver of production cost. The Wrecking Crew is not a film that holds back when it comes to physical spectacle. It features multiple large-scale fight sequences, car chases through Hawaiian streets, a climactic assault on a heavily guarded compound, an ocean rescue sequence, and enough pyrotechnics and practical stunt work to keep an entire stunt team employed for months. Practical stunts, which involve real human beings performing real dangerous activities rather than computers generating the illusion of them, are among the most expensive elements in any action film production. The stunt coordination team, the safety infrastructure, the time required to rehearse and execute each sequence safely, the multiple takes required to capture each moment from multiple angles, and the medical and insurance costs associated with any production involving controlled danger all add up to figures that can run into the millions of dollars per major sequence. Filming in Hawaii presented its own specific set of logistical costs. Hawaii is not a cheap location to film in. The cost of housing and feeding a large film crew on the islands, transporting equipment, obtaining the various permits required to shoot in different locations across Oahu, coordinating with local authorities and communities, and managing the general operational demands of a production in a location far from Hollywood infrastructure all drive costs significantly higher than they would be in a conventional studio environment. The New Zealand portion of the shoot added further complexity, as it required an entirely separate logistical operation in a different country with different regulations, union agreements, and infrastructure. The decision to film in both locations was not made carelessly. Both Hawaii and New Zealand brought something visually and culturally essential to the story that could not have been replicated elsewhere, and the production team clearly felt that the cost was justified by the result. The film also required a significant visual effects budget, though the production philosophy leaned heavily toward practical effects and real locations wherever possible. The score was composed by Bobby Kulik, also known in the music world as the Hakesun Cloak, who had previously collaborated with director Angel Manuel Soto on Blue Beetle. Composing an original score for a major action film is a lengthy and expensive process, involving not just the composer but an orchestra, recording studios, sound engineers, and the extended post-production work of integrating the music with the finished cut of the film. The film ultimately generated $89 million in revenue, which on a pure theatrical basis would represent a modest profit margin over its $78.5 million production budget. However, for a streaming exclusive, box office revenue is only one component of the financial picture. The real measure of the film's commercial success is its streaming performance, and on that front the numbers were extraordinary. The film topped Prime Video charts in 40 countries simultaneously within its first 24 hours of availability, which for Amazon translates not into ticket sales but into subscriber value, advertising opportunity, and platform prestige. The streamer likely considers the investment a strong success regardless of the raw production versus revenue calculation. Funny and memorable on-set moments. Now for the part that many fans are most curious about, which is what actually happened on set when you put Jason Momoa and Dave Bautista together in the middle of Hawaii for several months of filming. The answer, based on everything the cast and crew shared in interviews and press events surrounding the film's release, is that the atmosphere was somewhere between a professional film production and an extremely enthusiastic family reunion that occasionally got out of hand. One of the most discussed and genuinely hilarious aspects of the production was the contrast between how these two enormous men operated on set between takes. The film features a particularly memorable and physically demanding fight sequence involving rain, mud, a parked car, and both actors getting thoroughly beaten up in the course of filming it. By every conventional measure, this should have been one of the most uncomfortable and miserable sequences to shoot. The rain was real. The mud was real. The exhaustion was real. And yet Bautista, when asked about this sequence in the global virtual press conference held in London for the film's UK premiere, laughed about the fact that he and Momoa were jumping into a hot tub between takes. The image of these two absolutely massive human beings, covered in mud and fake blood from a brutal fight scene, climbing in and out of a hot tub in between action calls on a film set in Hawaii, is genuinely one of the most entertainingly absurd mental images that the production generated. Bautista has also been very open about the fundamental personality dynamic that made working with Momoa both incredibly fun and occasionally exhausting. He describes himself repeatedly as low energy, someone who likes calm, quiet, and measured interactions with the world. Momoa is, by the assessment of essentially everyone who has ever met or worked with him, the exact opposite of all of those things. He is a force of nature, a man who approaches every moment with maximum enthusiasm and zero concern for maintaining a conventional level of professional reserve on set. Bautista described their off-screen relationship with genuine warmth but also very obvious amusement, explaining that he realized during their time together on set that their energies should by rights clash and create friction, but somehow they just do not. They work together precisely because they are so opposite. Momoa brings the chaos and the energy, Bautista brings the calm and the structure, and the result is a working relationship that is both productive and endlessly entertaining for everyone around them. Jacob Batalon's experience on set added another layer of genuine joy to the production. Batalon, who was born and raised in Honolulu, had been away from his home state for years by the time the Wrecking Crew came along, building his career in Hollywood through the Spider-Man films and other projects. When his agent called him and told him about the role in a film shooting in Hawaii alongside Jason Momoa and Dave Bautista, Batalon's response was immediate and uncomplicated. He said in interviews that his agent barely got through the description before he agreed, because the combination of getting to go home to Hawaii and working with that specific cast was simply too good to pass up. Once on set, Batalon was reportedly in a state of almost continuous delight, not only because he was home but because he was working alongside two of the most entertaining human beings in the film industry. He was also able to use his genuine natural Hawaiian accent in the role, something that added authentic texture to his performance, and gave him a personal connection to the character that went beyond the usual professional relationship an actor has with a role. The global virtual press conference that was held for the London premiere of the film became something of a moment in itself, and those who watched it noted that the dynamic between Momoa, Bautista, and director Angel Manuel Soto captured something essential about what the atmosphere of the production must have been like. The three of them were clearly genuinely comfortable with each other in the loose, unguarded way that only develops after months of intensive collaborative work, and the humor that emerged in their interactions was the natural, spontaneous kind rather than the performed, promotional variety that often characterizes these events. Momoa himself, when asked what he hoped audiences would take away from the film, described the experience of making it as one of the most fun of his entire career, a statement that carries real weight given how many remarkable productions he has been part of over the years. He said he had the time of his life during the production, and the genuine warmth and enthusiasm with which he said it left no doubt that he meant every word. Bautista echoed the sentiment directly, saying it was the most fun he had ever had on a film throughout his entire career, and specifically singling out the experience of being in Hawaii and New Zealand, riding motorcycles through the Hawaiian landscape between shooting days, and the general atmosphere of creative joy that the production maintained throughout its months-long run. One of the more quietly poignant details about the production involves an actor named David Hakili Kenui Bell, who played a character named Ailkai in the film. Bell passed away on June 12, 2025, before the film was released, making The Wrecking Crew one of his final screen appearances. He had previously appeared in the live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch alongside fellow cast member Maya Kealoha, and his presence in The Wrecking Crew connects the film to both Hawaiian culture and to the memory of a performer who left the world too soon. The production also carried a meaningful self-awareness about the kind of film it was. In press interviews, both Momoa and Bautista acknowledged that they were aware of their place in the action film landscape and found humor in it. There are moments in the film itself where the characters make knowing references to other larger-than-life action stars, essentially winking at the audience about the very genre they inhabit. The director, Angel Manuel Soto, encouraged this self-awareness throughout the production, wanting the film to have a personality and a sense of humor about itself rather than taking its own muscle and mayhem premise entirely seriously. The musical choices made throughout the film also became a source of considerable amusement in press coverage. The production team made the bold decision to incorporate songs that operate completely against the conventional grain of action movie soundtracks, with Air Supply, the soft rock duo best known for their gentle romantic ballads of the 1980s, appearing on the soundtrack alongside more conventionally intense musical choices. The inclusion of Air Supply in a film where two enormous men beat up Yakuza gangsters in Hawaii is exactly the kind of deliberate, knowing absurdist humor that defined the spirit of the entire production, and it became one of the more discussed and celebrated quirks of the film among critics and audiences alike. What emerges from all of these details, taken together, is a picture of a production that was genuinely joyful from the inside out. The film works as well as it does not just because of professional execution but because the people making it were clearly having the time of their lives making it, and that energy transferred directly onto the screen and into the finished film that audiences around the world watched and enjoyed in enormous numbers from the moment it became available on January 28, 2026. The Wrecking Crew, 2026, complete cultural and historical details. The real Hawaii that Hollywood usually ignores. One of the most significant and meaningful things about The Wrecking Crew as a piece of cinema is not its action sequences or its comedy, or even its star power, but rather the deliberate and deeply researched decision to portray Hawaii in a way that Hollywood has almost never done before. For decades, Hollywood films and television productions have used Hawaii almost exclusively as a backdrop, a visual canvas of blue water, white sand beaches, lush green mountains, and tropical sunsets that serves the needs of whatever tourist fantasy or adventure story is being told. The real Hawaii, with its political wounds, its ongoing struggles over land and sovereignty, its complex social fabric, its native communities facing displacement and poverty, and its centuries of cultural richness existing far beneath the surface that cameras usually point at, has been almost entirely invisible in mainstream entertainment. The Wrecking Crew set out to change that. This was not a decision made casually or as a marketing strategy. It was the result of genuine conviction on the part of Jason Momoa, who was born in Honolulu and carries his Hawaiian identity as one of the most important parts of who he is as a human being, and it was reinforced by director Angel Manuel Soto, a Puerto Rican filmmaker whose own background gave him a deep and personal understanding of what it means to come from a colonized place whose culture is regularly consumed and simplified by outside entertainment industries without those industries taking any real responsibility for the communities they are depicting. The combination of Momoa's insider connection to Hawaiian culture and Soto's culturally aware directorial vision produced a film that attempts, within the framework of a mainstream action comedy, to show Hawaii as it actually is rather than as tourism brochures and resort advertisements have always framed it. The effort began before a single scene was written. Screenwriter Jonathan Tropper, who had been chosen to write the script, made a commitment to understanding Hawaiian culture in a genuine and thorough way before putting any words on the page. He worked closely with Jason Momoa and Momoa's longtime creative collaborator Thomas Pai Sibit, who were simultaneously working on the Apple TV series Chief of War, a project that explored Hawaiian history directly. Momoa and Sibit arranged a full week of cultural immersion for Tropper, taking him to places in Hawaii that tourists never see, introducing him to community elders, and facilitating meetings with representatives of the Aha Moku, which is the traditional native Hawaiian system for managing and preserving the natural lands and oceans of the islands. These meetings with elders and with the people who actively steward Hawaiian land and culture gave Tropper a foundation of genuine understanding that shaped every culturally specific element of the screenplay. Director Soto extended this approach to the physical production of the film. Rather than simply using Hawaii as a scenic backdrop and moving on, Soto conducted what he has described as a cultural scout alongside the standard location scout. Where a location scout identifies the best places to position cameras and place actors, a cultural scout involves genuinely immersing oneself in the life of a community, listening to how people speak, understanding the nuances of how they see themselves and their world, and allowing that understanding to dictate how the community is represented on screen. Soto worked continuously with both cultural advisors and spiritual advisors throughout the production, people whose role was to ensure that every element of Hawaiian cultural representation in the film was handled with accuracy, respect, and authenticity. He has spoken about this process as one that replaced the typical filmmaking dynamic, in which an outside industry arrives and takes what it needs from a location, with something much more collaborative and reciprocal. The history of Hawaiian homelands and why it matters to this film. The central conspiracy in The Wrecking Crew revolves around a criminal scheme to build a casino on Hawaiian homeland, and to fully understand why this plot device carries real cultural and historical weight, it is necessary to understand what Hawaiian homelands actually are, where they came from, and why they remain one of the most politically and emotionally charged issues in all of Hawaiian public life. The story of Hawaiian homelands begins with one of the most painful and consequential episodes in Hawaiian history, the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom in 1893. For centuries before European contact, which began with the arrival of British explorer Captain James Cook in 1778, the Hawaiian people had developed a sophisticated and deeply sustainable relationship with the land and sea of their islands. The concept of private land ownership as the Western world understands it simply did not exist in traditional Hawaiian society. Land was managed communally under a system called the Ahupue, which divided the islands into watershed units that stretched from the mountains to the sea, creating a system of land management that cultivated both terrestrial and ocean resources in a way that was both practically effective and spiritually grounded in the Hawaiian understanding of themselves as stewards rather than owners of the natural world. The arrival of Western missionaries and business interests in the 19th century began to erode this system. In 1848, under pressure from Western commercial interests and in an attempt to protect Hawaiian lands from foreign seizure, King Kamehameha III initiated the Great Mahele, a land redistribution that divided the island's lands among the monarch, the government, the high chiefs, and ordinary people, introducing for the first time the Western concept of private land ownership to Hawaii. While the intention was partly protective, the result over time was catastrophic for ordinary native Hawaiians. Many did not understand the new system of land claims, could not afford to participate in the processes required to secure title to land they already lived on and worked, and gradually lost control of territory that their families had occupied for generations. The situation worsened dramatically in 1893, when a group of American businessmen and sugar plantation owners, backed by U.S. military forces, overthrew Queen Liliuokalani and dismantled the Hawaiian kingdom entirely. The queen was imprisoned. The lands of the Hawaiian kingdom were confiscated. Hawaii was subsequently annexed by the United States in 1898 and governed as a territory until 1959, when it became the 50th state. Throughout this entire period, native Hawaiians watched their land, their cultural institutions, their language, and their sovereignty erode under the weight of American territorial governance and the booming sugar and later tourism industries that took over the islands. In 1921, the United States Congress passed the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which set aside approximately 200,000 acres of land in Hawaii as a trust specifically for homesteading by native Hawaiians. The idea behind the act was to provide native Hawaiians with land on which they could build homes, farm, and sustain themselves, acting as a partial acknowledgement of the historical injustices they had suffered. Under the act, eligible native Hawaiians, defined as individuals with at least 50% Hawaiian blood, could receive 99-year homestead leases on this designated land for just $1 per year, an arrangement intended to make homeownership accessible to a community that had been systematically dispossessed of its ancestral territory. However, the implementation of this system has been deeply flawed and deeply contentious for over 100 years. The waiting list for Hawaiian homeland leases grew to extraordinary lengths, with native Hawaiians waiting sometimes for decades to receive the leases they were legally entitled to. Large portions of the designated land could not be developed due to lack of basic infrastructure like roads and water systems. The bureaucratic management of the trust was frequently criticized as slow, inefficient, and insufficiently committed to serving its intended beneficiaries. Meanwhile, native Hawaiians as a community continued to experience disproportionately high rates of poverty, houselessness, and poor health outcomes compared to other groups in Hawaii, with direct connections to the loss of land and the erosion of the cultural systems that had previously sustained their communities. The issue of Hawaiian homelands remains live, politically charged, and deeply important to native Hawaiian communities today. Attempts to develop, commercialize, or otherwise exploit land designated as Hawaiian homeland represent some of the most sensitive and contentious issues in Hawaiian politics. The idea that a corrupt politician could be bribed to allow a casino to be built on Hawaiian homeland, which is the central criminal scheme in The Wrecking Crew, is therefore not a fictional invention designed purely for plot convenience. It is a scenario that directly mirrors real ongoing tensions in Hawaii between development interests, political corruption, and the rights of native Hawaiian communities over their designated homestead territories. By making this the engine of its villain scheme, the film roots its action comedy entertainment in a genuinely real and genuinely serious issue that matters to the people of Hawaii. The Yakuza in Hawaii, a real historical presence. The other major criminal element in The Wrecking Crew is the Yakuza, the Japanese organized crime syndicate, and their presence in a film set in Hawaii is not as geographically unlikely as it might initially seem to audiences unfamiliar with the actual history of organized crime in the Pacific. The Yakuza's historical connection to Hawaii and to the broader Pacific region is real and documented, rooted in the history of Japanese immigration to Hawaii that began in the late 19th century. Japan and Hawaii have been closely connected for more than 150 years. Beginning in the 1880s, large numbers of Japanese laborers were recruited to work on Hawaii's sugar plantations, and over subsequent decades the Japanese immigrant community in Hawaii grew to become one of the largest and most established ethnic communities in the islands. Japanese culture, language, cuisine, religious practice, and community institutions became deeply embedded in Hawaiian society, and today Japanese Americans represent one of the most significant demographic groups in Hawaii. Japanese immigration also brought with it the full spectrum of cultural and social institutions from the home country, including, over time, the organizational presence of Japanese criminal networks. Yakuza organizations historically extended their operations wherever significant Japanese communities established themselves, particularly in port cities and commercial centers with strong Japan connections. Hawaii, as a major Pacific hub with deep Japanese cultural ties, was not immune to this influence. While the specific operational details of Yakuza presence in Hawaii have varied across different historical periods, the general premise of the film, that Japanese organized crime would have established connections and operational infrastructure in Honolulu, is historically grounded. The film uses this real historical context to create a criminal threat that feels plausible within the Hawaiian setting rather than arbitrary or imported from an unrelated cultural environment. The character of Nakamura, the Yakuza leader played by Japanese musician and actor Miyavi, represents this intersection of Japanese criminal organization and Hawaiian criminal landscape. The decision to cast an actual Japanese performer in the role rather than approximating Japanese identity through a non-Japanese actor was part of the film's broader commitment to authentic cultural representation. And Miyavi's own background as a globally recognized figure in Japanese music culture gives the character a dimension of credibility and cultural specificity that a different casting choice would not have provided. Polynesian culture and the casting of the film. One of the most culturally significant aspects of The Wrecking Crew beyond its story is the extraordinary concentration of Polynesian and Pacific Islander talent both in front of and behind the camera. This was not accidental. It was a conscious and deliberate curatorial decision driven largely by Jason Momoa's personal commitment to using his platform and his creative authority to bring Pacific Islander performers and stories into mainstream entertainment visibility. Polynesia is one of the world's most remarkable cultural regions, encompassing the vast Pacific Ocean triangle stretching from Hawaii in the north to New Zealand in the southwest to Easter Island in the southeast. The Polynesian peoples, including native Hawaiians, Samoans, Tongans, Maoris, and many other groups, share common ancestral origins, related languages, and deep cultural connections that developed over centuries of extraordinary maritime navigation. The Polynesian navigators who settled the Pacific Islands thousands of years ago accomplished feats of open ocean seafaring that remain among the most impressive achievements in human history, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean using only the stars, the wind, ocean currents, the flight patterns of birds, and the accumulated wisdom of generations of navigational knowledge, without any of the technological instruments that Western maritime exploration relied upon. This culture of extraordinary resilience, navigational mastery, and deep connection to both land and ocean forms the backdrop against which the characters of The Wrecking Crew exist. Jason Momoa, whose father carries native Hawaiian and Samoan heritage, embodies this Polynesian inheritance visibly and vocally throughout the film and in all of his public work. Temuera Morrison, a Maori New Zealander of the Ngati Maniapoto tribe, brings another strand of Polynesian identity to the film. Frankie Adams, also a Samoan New Zealander who plays the cousin Nanny, brings a third. Roimata Fox, who plays Layla, James's wife, is Maori. Jacob Batalon, born and raised in Honolulu of Filipino heritage, represents the broader Pacific community. The concentration of Pacific Islander talent in significant roles is something that essentially never happens in mainstream Hollywood productions at this scale, and it was noticed and celebrated by Pacific Island communities across the world. The role of Nanny in particular carries cultural weight. Nanny Palakiko, played by Frankie Adams, is a Hawaiian woman who works within the governmental structures of Hawaii while also navigating the pull of her cultural identity and her family loyalties. Her position gives the film a female Pacific Islander character who is intelligent, capable, politically aware, and culturally grounded, a combination that is almost entirely absent from mainstream Hollywood productions. Adams has spoken about how important it was to approach the character with the kind of authenticity and care that Brown's stories deserve, and the cultural safety she felt on a set led by Momoa and guided by cultural advisors gave her the space to do that work properly. The Hawaiian language, known as Alalo Hawaii, also makes appearances in the film, not in a performative or decorative way but as part of the natural fabric of how Hawaiian characters communicate with each other. The decision by director Soto to allow Jacob Batalon's character to speak Hawaiian Pidgin, the distinctive Creole English spoken by native residents of Hawaii that developed from the mixture of languages brought by plantation workers and indigenous communities over more than a century, without subtitles or explanation, was a pointed artistic choice. It communicated to the audience that this film was not translating Hawaii for an outside gaze but rather presenting it on its own terms, for its own people first, with the rest of the world invited to engage without having everything explained and simplified for their comfort. Gentrification, displacement, and the homeless community. One of the most quietly powerful and historically grounded elements of The Wrecking Crew is its brief but meaningful engagement with the reality of houselessness and displacement in Hawaii. In a scene that was filmed not on a constructed set but in an actual camp community where real Hawaiian residents were living, the brothers encounter a community of houseless people on Hawaiian homelands. These community members, portrayed by real people from the actual community rather than actors, help Johnny on his personal journey toward accepting his Hawaiian heritage and reconnecting with the place he came from. They are shown as deeply caring, culturally connected, and fully human, not as a social problem to be observed from a safe distance but as members of a community with dignity, warmth, and their own profound relationship to the land beneath their feet. Director Soto made the conscious decision to shoot this scene with the real community precisely because the issue of houselessness in Hawaii is directly connected to the same forces of gentrification and land exploitation that the film's central villain embodies. Hawaii has one of the highest rates of houselessness per capita of any American state, and the drivers of that crisis are deeply rooted in the same patterns of land alienation, overdevelopment, and the prioritization of tourism and commercial interests over the needs of resident communities that began with the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom and continued through every subsequent phase of American governance of the islands. Real estate prices in Hawaii have been driven so astronomically high by development pressure, tourism infrastructure, and mainland investment that ordinary Hawaiian residents, including native Hawaiians who are already disproportionately economically marginalized, increasingly cannot afford to live in the place they were born and raised. This is precisely the situation that the film's villain is attempting to accelerate and exploit through his casino scheme. By showing the human cost of that kind of development through a real community living on Hawaiian homelands, the film makes the political stakes of its action plot concrete and emotionally immediate in a way that pure genre entertainment rarely attempts. Soto has connected this theme directly to his own Puerto Rican experience, noting that displacement, gentrification, and the exploitation of indigenous cultural territories by outside commercial interests are patterns he recognized deeply from his own background, giving his handling of these themes in The Wrecking Crew a personal authenticity that extends beyond research alone. The Aha Moku System and Native Hawaiian Land Stewardship. One of the cultural institutions that writer Jonathan Tropper learned about during his preparatory immersion week in Hawaii, and which informs the backdrop of the film's conflict over Hawaiian homelands, is the Aha Moku system. The Aha Moku is a traditional native Hawaiian governance and stewardship structure that was developed by native Hawaiians to preserve and protect their natural lands and oceans. It is an ancient system rooted in the same Ahupue concept of watershed management that organized Hawaiian society for centuries before Western contact, updated and adapted to function within the contemporary legal and political environment of the state of Hawaii. The system recognizes that the relationship between native Hawaiians and the natural world is not simply an economic or practical relationship, but a profoundly spiritual and cultural one. The land is not simply property to be bought, sold, and developed according to whoever holds legal title. It is a living entity with which Hawaiian people have a relationship of reciprocal responsibility, what the Hawaiian language captures in the concept of malama, which means to care for the land. This worldview is fundamentally incompatible with the philosophy of commercial development that the villain Robichaud represents, and the film uses the conflict between these two worldviews as the moral foundation of its story, even while delivering that story through the conventions of a mainstream action comedy. The Aha Kaiol Advisory Committee, which upholds the Aha Moku system in the contemporary Hawaiian political context, represents exactly the kind of institutional structure that is threatened by the kind of corrupt government-criminal partnership depicted in the film. When a governor can be bribed to override the protections that exist for Hawaiian homelands and allow commercial development on culturally sacred territory, the entire framework of native Hawaiian stewardship and self-determination that institutions like the Aha Moku represent is placed under direct threat. The film understands this, and by giving Momoa's character a personal journey toward accepting and embracing his Hawaiian heritage, it connects the political stakes of the story to an individual emotional arc in a way that makes the cultural content feel integral rather than imposed. The buddy cop genre and its historical roots. Beyond its specific cultural content, The Wrecking Crew also operates within and comments upon a genre tradition that carries its own cultural and historical significance. The buddy cop film, which pairs two characters of contrasting personalities, backgrounds, and methods and forces them to work together against a common threat while simultaneously working through the friction of their differences, is one of Hollywood's most enduring genre templates. The template was defined and codified most completely by the original Lethal Weapon in 1987, the film that Bautista explicitly referenced in his famous tweet proposing the project, and which critics have drawn direct comparisons to throughout the coverage of The Wrecking Crew. The original Lethal Weapon was a film about two men, one black and one white, one older and one younger, one cautious and one reckless, who had to find a way to function together in a world defined by violence, systemic corruption, and the difficulty of building trust across profound personal and cultural differences. The racial dimension of the pairing was not incidental to the film's cultural impact. It was part of a broader moment in American cinema in the 1980s when buddy films were beginning to explicitly engage with questions of race, identity, and the possibility of solidarity across historical divisions. Films like the original Beverly Hills Cop, 48 Hours, and Lethal Weapon all placed black and white male characters in partnerships that produced both comedy and genuine emotional connection, reflecting a particular moment in American culture's ongoing wrestling with its own racial history. The Wrecking Crew updates this template for a 2026 moment in which both leads are men of color, both carry significant cultural heritage from outside the white American mainstream, and the setting is not an American urban environment defined by black and white American racial history, but rather a Hawaiian landscape defined by indigenous Polynesian culture and its complex relationship with American colonialism. The film's comedy and action operate within the buddy cop template, but its cultural content pushes the genre into genuinely new territory, asking questions not just about two men with different personalities but about two men trying to understand their relationship to a cultural and familial inheritance that connects them to something larger and more historically complex than either of them has fully reckoned with. The choice to set the story specifically in Hawaii, to ground its central conflict in the real issue of Hawaiian homelands, and to populate its cast with Polynesian and Pacific Islander performers is therefore not just a cultural gesture but a genuine genre evolution. One that uses the familiar architecture of the buddy cop film to carry cultural and historical content that the genre has never previously attempted to address. Jason Momoa as a cultural ambassador. No discussion of the cultural significance of The Wrecking Crew would be complete without addressing the particular position that Jason Momoa occupies as a cultural figure in relation to this film, and to Hawaii more broadly. Momoa is not simply a famous actor who happens to have been born in Hawaii. He is a man who has spent his career actively and consciously using his platform to advocate for Hawaiian culture, Hawaiian land rights, and Pacific Islander representation in media. His production company, Pride of Gypsies, has been involved in projects that specifically center Hawaiian and indigenous Pacific stories. His work on Chief of War, which told the story of the Hawaiian warrior King Kaena directly from a Hawaiian cultural perspective, represents a direct investment in the kind of storytelling that has historically been denied to indigenous Pacific communities by mainstream entertainment industries. His environmental activism, through his Mananala Water Company and his vocal public advocacy for ocean conservation, is also culturally grounded in the Hawaiian and Polynesian understanding of the ocean as a living relative rather than a resource to be exploited. The values that animate his environmental work are the same values that animate the cultural approach to The Wrecking Crew, reflecting a consistent worldview that connects personal identity, cultural heritage, and civic responsibility in a way that is very specifically rooted in who he is and where he comes from. By insisting that The Wrecking Crew engage genuinely with Hawaiian culture, by ensuring that cultural advisors were present throughout the production, by helping connect the screenwriter with elders and community leaders before a word of the script was written, and by using his creative authority as a producer to shape the film's relationship to the place where it was set, Momoa turned what could have been a conventional action comedy shot in Hawaii for its scenery into something that the people of Hawaii could recognize as a genuine representation of their world. That is not a small achievement for a mainstream entertainment product, and it is one of the reasons the film resonated so strongly with local Hawaiian audiences and with Pacific Islander communities around the world when it was released on January 28, 2026.